is Ryan Sierre for the TooManyCasts podcast. Just wanted to say real quick, remember there will be random time skips throughout the episode, and as for the blurry man in the picture of the Too Many Mics, I just have to say, that is nobody. We don't know him. We don't know him. Nope. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the TooManyCasts podcast, the podcast where we just have a regular podcast, but at some point throughout the episode, the guest here will tell us one thing they think there are too many of in the world today, such as, judging by this season, with me, too many Girl Scout cookies, or maybe too much jazz music. Hence how there are too many podcasts on the internet today. Everybody's got their own podcast. Without further ado, I'm going to let the guest introduce themselves.
My name's Jack Stanley, and I was a teacher. I work with museums. I do research and history, and I babble to lots of people. And I do have a site on YouTube in which I talk. It's just my name, Jack Stanley. And I talk about history, I talk about music, I talk about life, and I talk about it from a perspective of someone who's been around for a while. And I think that pretty well covers me.
That is awesome. Yeah, so it's interesting. I remember when I was first trying to get in contact with you, there was actually a lot of Jack Stanleys. So definitely I will be putting your specific YouTube
It's
in
a
the
common
description.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found out
So,
there's a gymnast by the name of Jack Stanley and stuff like that.
oh my gosh. So an interesting thing, one of the first things we had talked about before the show was that you mentioned David McAuliffe as a historian, and I went to look into this guy, and it turns out he actually went to my university.
Oh,
Yeah, I had no idea. Well, I did actually, but I didn't put two and two together. And my university, when I was going there, and obviously they still must be, although I'm sure it's been hampered because of COVID. They do like special guest speakers will come out every Tuesday and Thursday. Just for the heck of it. It's nothing super special. They just are that, I guess, fancy to have like historians come out and give speeches. So, anything you want to elaborate on about Dave McAuliffe?
well, he's a fascinating fellow. I've heard him speak a few times, and I love the whole thing about with typewriters. He's terrified of computers, and afraid. He said when he's using a computer, he might hit the wrong button and destroy a whole month's work. And he's just at age. Okay, it's an interesting thing. You know, it's fascinating when you look at people who are pre-computer. They look at it with an eye of suspicion. You know, no matter what. And he's a brilliant guy, but he has made up a Royal #2 typewriter is perfect for him. And I love his books. He's a fascinating historian. Wonderful.
Yeah.
And also a wonderful speaker. You know, it's an interesting thing. A lot of times great writers are not great speakers, and a lot of times great speakers are not great writers. But he's one of those that has both qualities.
Yeah, that is so funny you say that because I remember one of the comments I used to get a lot in college whenever I would write essays, or essays is I would the professors would often say I wrote like how I spoke, and they said that was not generally a great thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. So let's see.
That was not what? You
That
broke
was
up there
not.
just for a second.
Oh yeah, that was not generally a great thing that I wrote like how I spoke. But,
You know, it's an interesting thing. John Adams, our second president, he made a comment during his life, and he said, "Write like you speak." And it's an interesting thing. So we get a very good understanding of how he spoke because his writing is the way he spoke. and it's a fascinating thing when you read it. You kind of get a sense you're having a conversation with John.
Yeah, yeah, the ways, so that actually is a fascinating thing to me there because so I'm a bit of a language geek. I'm not just a bit, I'm a super language geek. And I recently, like in the past few years or so, learned that the American colonists and the British actually both spoke a very rhotic accent, and that the whole like
You know, they're kind of thinking of the United States as somewhat of a Galapagos Island for the British tongue. They're
oh
saying
wow.
down south with that southern twang. We think that's more like the way perhaps the British spoke, several hundred years ago.
Yeah. So as you know, I mean, I'm a Virginian. You're a New Yorker. And I believe Virginia has this island called Tangier, which is supposed to be a place that has a preserved accent of like
Hmm.
old like American. And there's some videos of it on YouTube, and they sound sort of like it's like if Irish and British and like a Southern accent had a baby. Like it is fascinatingly all over the place. Yeah. Um, Now, what's
Well,
interesting? Oh,
language is a fascinating thing.
oh, of course. Yeah. Um, what's interesting here is you mentioned when we were talking before the show, you mentioned how you found mistakes on history to be a fascinating topic, and of course, I was confused. Did you mean mistakes like historical figures made, or do you mean like errors in historiography?
Historiography,
Ah,
and there's a lot of it. I mean, and the old story. You tell a story long enough, and people believe it.
hmm,
And that has been told time and time again on various historic figures, and the presidency has been a wide bazaar of all that. Actually, lots of stories that just aren't true,
hmm. No,
and
that's
and
yeah, like the cherry tree with
just
George
take for
Washington.
instance, but here's more to that. Actually, that was a fellow by the name of Parson Weems who did the cherry tree story, but he also did another one which we don't ever talk about, and that is in Valley Forge that George Washington sat down and prayed in the snow. And you see the picture all the time of him praying in Valley Forge. That's by the same guy who did the cherry tree.
Oh wow.
So I mean, it's fake for all intents and purposes. I mean, first off, he had a house. If you wanted to pray, you go in the house.
Hmm.
Why sit in the ice cold snow and pray, right? I mean, if you think about it, and so it just
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense at all. And it's just one of the other myths that was created by Parson Weems.
Hmm. Well, I definitely got to do my homework on that guy. I'm looking up this painting right now of him praying at Valley Forge by his horse. Um,
Yeah,
this reminds me, do you know of a painter by the name of Mort Kunstler who paints a lot of Civil War paintings?
I honestly don't. Um,
Hmm.
I probably have seen his stuff. I'm sure. Um,
Oh yeah, like 'cause it's very picturesque to the tune of like to the tune and style of like your like Thomas Kincaid's and kinds of people like Ruane Manning.
okay, yeah.
Um, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, no, I'm sure like I mean, of course, right? It's such a truist statement to make, but like I'm sure there's like tons of and it wouldn't be so much lies as much as misdirection. I think there's a lot of misdirection in the way that we tell history to the next generations. I'm
Sure,
sure.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. You want to create like a parable of sorts. That's the whole idea. Yeah. You want to
Oh
give
yeah.
this a picture of virtue or whatever, and unfortunately, in doing so, you're turning. Well, what we do in history, we turn people into one-dimensional figures.
Hmm.
You have a very hard time kind of picturing Abraham Lincoln going into the outhouse. I mean, it's just not something that even makes any sense. because,
Yeah.
he is a thing. He's not a person anymore. And we have
Mhm.
made him into this thing that kind of floats into the room and says, with malice towards none, charity for all, and this floats out the door the other way. Um, and we have just taken this human and found all wonderful things to say and leaving all the bad things, putting them in a nice little safe place where they won't get touched. And that's unfortunately a lot of what our history is.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. Um gosh. Oh wow.
Divide and the polka mix. People, dance. And then, of course, you had proper dancing, and then you started with the foxtrot and all that other stuff in the early 20th century, and people
Mm,
would touch, and it was
that's right.
considered very lewd, lascivious, and nasty, and jazz got a bad name for a while, but it eventually caught on, which everything does with change.
That is
Ooh,
so fascinating.
the clock is ticking there.
Oh, hello, ticking clock. Yeah, it's so
Yeah, I have
interesting
an old clock from
because
1845 here. Speaking of things
oh,
that last a long time,
damn, there you go.
it's
Yeah,
175 years old, and it's pretty.
yeah,
I'm a
my
little off here, but that's all right. It's 175 years old. I'll give it that benefit of the doubt.
my grandpa had a was a pocket watch that was almost like a locket. You could pop it open and look at all the gears that were inside of it. It was
Sure.
weird. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, the thing about jazz, it's so interesting. I almost wonder, yeah, because it's so funny how what was once, so lewd and inappropriate for the society at the time now becomes something that is very, I feel like, a little like vanilla. Like, no one these
Oh
days
yeah.
really thinks of swing music. No one these days thinks of swing music and goes like, "Oh, dude, that's that dirty erotic swing music." Like, no, like swing music is very like, right, yeah, it's very, very
Yeah.
calming. It's very background. Yeah.
I won't be around to see this, but I think it'll be absolutely hilarious. 50 years from now, I want to see rap artists get together, and I want to see the old rap artists get in and say, "Yeah, rap isn't what it used to be," and you're going to see the exact same thing happening.
Yeah.
You're going to see
I
the exact thing where they're saying, oh, "Go ahead, I'm sorry."
I was gonna say that I actually say that currently, and I know that it's not very nice of me, but it's so interesting. I I have a soft spot for underground '90s rap or like early 2000s, and I tend to
Hmm.
juxtapose it with a lot of like the sort of hip hop that has sort of made the airwaves ever since around like gosh, like 2012. Because yeah, like a lot of like early 2000s, 90s rap, I feel like speaks to me anyway in a way that modern day hip hop doesn't. Like sort of like the old NWA, Run DMC, Wu Tang Clan, stuff like that. A lot of it seemed to be so politically charged. And speak towards like
Hmm.
topics of disaffectedness and alienation that like um, modern hip hop obviously seems to just be so party based and happy.
Hmm. Hmm.
So but yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's going to go through. It's going to go through just like every other form of music. It's going to go through various transformations. In fact,
Hmm.
probably, as I said, in 50 years, I don't think it'll be very much the same at all. It's going to be very
Sure.
different. And you're going to have purists,
Hmm.
and they're going to be bitching and moaning just like they're bitching and moaning about jazz and polkas. And, we don't change. That's the interesting thing about the human animal. Our toys change, but we as people, we have just certain operative modes. We keep acting the same. We are sort of like a phonograph record with a skip in it. He plays a little bit and then goes right back and plays it all over again, but we didn't know. We forget. We have amnesia, historical amnesia. And we forget
Yeah.
totally about what we did in the past. And then we go right out and do the same damn thing all over again. And we think it's new.
Dude, that's exactly how I feel with yeah, no, I feel
We sound like a bunch of idiots.
yeah,
But we,
yeah.
the thing is
Mhm.
that's the story of man.
Mhm.
It's like little epics of stories, and we're so happy we did this, blah blah blah, and then we have a big war and we kill each other.
Judging by
Yeah,
the
too
differences
long
in our
actually. Yeah,
I'm
I'd
sure.
like to find a way of reversing it. Actually.
Yeah. um but it reminds me of I feel like, in a sense, and maybe you'll probably compare this to the 1800s or the 1700s, but I feel like the 21st century seems to feel like haunted. It seems to feel haunted by the 20th century, and we seem to be having the 20th century on loop a little bit here. And again, I know this sounds like a little bit of a broken record from me, but like going back to like big tech, we have all these, the Facebooks and the Twitters and other things that aren't coming to mind right now. They are in a way modern monopolies, and it reminds me so much of the robber barons of like the 1900s, and sort of how America had its industry boom from the robber baron monopolies at the time of the people like the Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Ford, and other kinds of people for their respective
Sure.
markets at the time. Yeah, I feel like we're totally repeating Monopoly, but and as you say, we have it's a different like tool. It's like a different like area. It's a dimension
Toys are
of
totally different.
toys are totally different. It's a new dimension of communication, but it's the same basic crap, right? Like
Sure.
it's now we're having
It is
it's the same.
exactly
Yeah.
the same thing, and the fact is that we don't know how to handle it because we didn't know how to handle it then. Um, you had the robber barons. The robber barons are a double-edged sword. You have to remember that. That they
Hmm.
were greedy, they were for power, but they also gave. If you think about the museums and the technology, I mean, Thomas Edison, when he lit New York City, it wasn't done by Thomas Edison. He didn't have the money to do it. J.P. Morgan paid for it.
Hmm.
That's an important thing to remember. Yes, J.P. Morgan was a jerk at times, but also he threw money at people, at communities, because he realized it balanced the scale. And then he could do what he did. I mean, and you think about it. He ran the railroads. He basically created U.S. Steel. He bought it from Andrew Carnegie, and he owned the Titanic. I mean,
Oh.
I
Oh.
mean, there's so many different things, but also all of these Carnegie, same thing. I mean, he was buying his way to heaven. He was building libraries and concert halls and stuff like that. All of these guys were double-edged swords. Now, the
Sir.
fact is,
Yeah.
today we don't see it as much. Yes, they do
Mhm.
give, but it doesn't generally affect the general public. It's like special groups or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, no, yeah, yeah. And what little change we do see towards the public is, it's there, but it's very incremental. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, so, no, yeah, I actually, what was it? You did make a video that was about the, it was a musical. Was you were playing on one of your phonographs there? It was a rip from a musical, and I thought that was very interesting. Because obviously, so I had a bit of a theater stint myself in high school, and I was in a few musicals, and one of them
Hmm.
it was actually interesting. It was actually a popular one, which I thought was so funny because it was very juvenile and very much for kids. It wasn't Les Mis; it was a Seussical. It was a Dr. Seuss musical, and Yeah, yeah, it was very done up, very juvenile, but
Hmm.
it was quite popular. I looked this up, and there's a
Yeah,
bunch of recordings of it from
it
tons of
was. I
other
remember it.
theater companies.
Hmm.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was like from the 80s or something like that. Something
Sounds about
1980s,
right.
19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss is an
I
old
did a
guy.
lot
He
of music
also,
as
yep.
well. I worked as a singer for years as well. Um,
That's
I
right.
worked
That
for
is
Disney
something
for a
that
while,
hmm your singer stint,
and
that's fascinating to me. Can you elaborate on that?
well, I worked in several different things with singing. I worked with a vocal group in the New York area, something called the Meadowlands Complex. It was a giant stadium. All this other.
We interrupt this program to bring you our irregularly scheduled programming of my friend Cornelius. Cornelius, come back home. So, I'm here today to tell you the glory of Harry Soap. I don't think you understand, sir. There's not a lot of Harry Soap out there, and I want you to know that you can also connect the dots. Have you ever wanted to be an ad? Do you want to be an ad? I want to. Do you? I want to be an ad. Yeah. Ever think about that? Remember when coloring books were popular? Oh, oh no! Undo it. Okay. Anyway, as I was saying, remember when coloring books were popular? I remember, dude. I want to be in a coloring book commercial. Honestly, if you, I'm gonna be quite honest with you. I've seldom met a man whose face says 1,000 words quite like yours. So I have an ancestor. Ancestor probably sounds weird, but I have a long extended relative in that movie. I don't know if you know who John Fiedler is, um, but I'm a descendant. I'm related to John Fiedler, who was juror number two in 12 Angry Men. And apparently, John Fiedler, he also did a lot, did a bit in the ways of film and composing,
Hmm.
um,
That's cool.
which yeah,
I,
it's
I'm
so
trying to
it's
I'm
yeah.
trying to place the face. I can't off the top of my head. Um, I know Henry Fonda was in that, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's been like many years since I've seen it, but I think I watched it on television when it was on like late night movie, like maybe 30 years ago. Last time I've seen
Yeah,
it.
that is. Yeah, I remember a while back, I had seen that movie and A Streetcar Named Desire
Hmm.
with Marilyn Brando. Um,
Sure.
yeah. Um, let's see. So, public speaking. You did public speaking since your teens. I
Yeah.
actually have a bit of a running curriculum vitae with that. I've always been more of a project person, like a test person.
Hmm.
Whenever it came to academics, I dreaded tests and I loved writing up either essays or working on PowerPoint presentations. Um, so I dig public speaking, and I actually did this one thing called it was called forensics, but it had nothing to do with criminal science. It was called forensics public speaking and prose, which was an extracurricular at the high school where you would perform speeches or you would make up a persuasive argument on the fly. Actually, you had 2 minutes to make up an argument, and then you had 5 minutes to give a speech and perform the argument about it. I thought that was always really fun. Did you do anything like that, or?
Uh, in high school, yeah, and stuff like that, and debate and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did. We had actually had a debate club. Actually, we used to do that. But more or less, what I would do is speak before the public, um, and talk about various subjects. I would join like another historian or another person. We'd sit there and, you know, hash about the presidency, or I'd give a talk about sound recording, give demonstrations. And of course, I was a guest on a lot of programs like the History Channel and stuff like that, talking about sound recording, talking about motion pictures, um, and the whole idea of innovation, which is sort of like my my field, as it were, studying the history of. And also, I had a kind of a neat thing because I worked in a research laboratory at one time, just for fun. And so it's a wonderful thing when you want to study the history of a research laboratory and you worked in one. You get a totally different perspective that a lot of historians don't have because they've never done it. And, you find it crazy. That's the whole idea behind innovation. You got to be somewhat crazy because you're looking at things in a different way. And so when I talk, I try to explain some of the history, some of the innovation, some of the ideas, and some of the absolute insanity. And that's the most important thing. You have to have that little touch of insanity. And it's a good thing because that not a lot of insanity, just a little bit. And just that little touch allows you to look at everything just a little bit of a different way. Sort of like holding a piece of glass in the sun, the prism, and you move the glass a little bit and suddenly the rays go in a different direction. That's the whole idea behind innovation, is just having the ability to look at something differently. And it was very good for me because I did like 30 different programs for different channels and different shows in different countries. Did them in Russia and Germany, Japan, China, Korea, a few others. I can't remember anymore. But
Wow. Holy
it was
moly,
fun.
that's
I
awesome.
really enjoyed that. And it was fun. And I don't do it anymore. But now I do little talk. You sign a paper basically saying what you invent is Thomas Edison's or AT&T's or Microsoft's, whatever. And this is where the problem lies. They think that Thomas Edison and Tesla are individuals fighting against each other, which isn't the case at all. And so there's just a lot of misinformation. As I mentioned before with history, there's a lot of stories that come out and a lot of tales. And unfortunately, the stories have been told so many times, people think that Thomas Edison is doing terrible things to Tesla. They say he stole his ideas. Well, what ideas did he have that he stole? I don't know of any. Tesla wanted to use AC. Edison was DC. So, hello.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
an interesting thing. And Tesla, as I said, brilliant, great ideas. He did some wonderful stuff. But unfortunately, he, in many cases, was his own worst enemy. Which
Yeah,
is
no,
true with many great geniuses are like that. They're so self-destructive.
that's, yeah, no, I mean, a lot of these historical figures here seem to have a flair for the dramatic to a very lethal end.
Sure, sure.
Um, Goodness. Yeah, and then there's that Tesla coil. Um, Now, did he make that or?
Yeah, brilliant thing. Fantastic. Yes,
Okay.
yes, he did. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
Heck yeah.
I don't want to take anything away from Tesla, but the fact is that he's been given, the sun and the moon practically of developing, and that's not exactly the case.
Right.
A lot of people did stuff before him, and he improved some of it, and he had some original ideas of his own, which are fantastic. And then he kind of stayed in a hotel, New Yorker in New York, for like 15 years, and he was very strange. He was kind of out of it. And then they stole his papers. I mean, they could have done it 20 years earlier because he was out of it then.
That's
Um,
right. Wait a minute. There was that whole conspiracy. There's a lot of conspiracy
I,
theories
it's
floating around about like
yeah,
the government tried to take his like ideas or something.
what's the sense of it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's it doesn't make any sense to me. And I watched a program where they tried to prove that fact,
Hmm.
and they spent the whole time saying that it was true, but they couldn't prove it. So I mean, so hello. that's like that's like one big circle going round and round and round. And I can't prove it happened, so I don't know if it happened, but it happened. So
It's like they're kind of like saying like, well, I can't prove it happened, but you can't prove it didn't happen.
right. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that also came with Topsy the elephant. They said can't prove it.
Yeah.
Pa, 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 pa. I said, okay, I'm not even going to get into this conversation. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. Uh,
Of
uh,
course. So segueing right along is a fascinating segue,
sure.
very easy. Laid the groundwork for you apparently said at one point you spoke with Thomas Edison's youngest son, Theodore.
Yes. In fact, had many conversations with him. You know what I did when I was quite young? I decided I wanted to talk to lots of people so I could learn. And I said the greatest way to learn history is to talk to the people that were involved in it. The people with the answers. Those are the people you ask the questions of.
Hmm.
And I, I, I got hold of people, found out how to get hold, and I called them. Simple as that.
Heck yeah.
And we sat down and started talking. And he said, "You're very young, and why are you interested?" And I said, "This is fascinating to me." And so he kind of took a shine to me, and we would sit down. And he was at the age, he was at that time, he was probably pushing 80 years of age. And I was, like 20 or whatever. And he liked to talk, and I wanted to listen. And so it worked very well. It was a very good relationship in that regard. I'm starting to get to the other side of things now. I'm talking all the
Yeah.
time.
Giving me
it,
the
it,
next generation all the knowledge. Yeah.
but he taught me a great deal about his father. He talked about all kinds of things, and also he mentioned other people, and I talked to other folks. And then when I
Is akin to surrealism or Dadaism, whereby what I'll do is I like to record a stream of some kind where I'm maybe playing a game, or um, going along for a stroll around like some town or city. And then what I do is what's fun to do is to splice them up and rearrange them back in the video editor in out of order ways, so it just is fragmented and disordered. And there's sort of two different things you can do with that. If you keep the vocal audio in, if you're talking, then it definitely
Mhm.
comes off like a really screwed up video, and it's funny in the sense of the Dadaism of it, I guess, and the just the yeah the spliced up, chopped up ness of it. But if you put music through it, then it just becomes a cool music video, and then you're like, oh, sweet. Um, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
Mhm. Now, well, the I have one more topic or question for you,
Sure.
and then, of course, anything you want to add on. Um, so travels. Um, it seems like you've been around the world, and
Yeah.
I would say that I've seen my share of places too. And it's weird because I normally don't think I have, but then I'll assume that someone else in my life has, and they'll look at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, right. I guess I've traveled a lot more than the average bear." Um, so let's see. I've been pretty much like all across the East Coast. I've been all the way up actually to Niagara Falls, Canada, and all the way down to Florida. So I've been through Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware. I've been um, oh, I've not been to Massachusetts or Maine actually. I always forget those are there. The furthest west I've ever gone is Ohio, which is, I guess, in our I feel like an hour where we are, it's not very west at all. And Yeah, I've been to been to South Carolina's famous restaurant south of the border. If you've been to that, it's like a really overly romanticized fast food place, but like Guy
Yes,
Fieri. Yeah. Yep.
I was there. I was there twice, two different times, and two different, very different decades. I was
Yeah.
there in the 1960s, and it was very different, very, very plain and basic. And then I was there in the 1990s, and it had totally transformed into something else. I think more toward now. I have no idea what it would be like. This, I saw it, like I said last time, probably in 1992.
Mm, mm. And then down in Georgia, uh, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but back in the early 2010s, like around 2011, 2012, Georgia was they had a bit of a thing where they would have roadside stands selling roadside vendors for peach bread, and that was like a Georgian thing for a while there.
Really?
Um, I've been up to New York a few times. I've only been to because apparently New York City, man, and this is coming from a Virginian, so New York City is massive because I've only seen bits of Greenwich, the Bronx Zoo,
Hmm.
Manhattan, and that's about it. Like people like oh
Yeah.
I've seen Times Square. I was in Times Square. Um, yeah, I think
New
there's
York,
obviously a
five
lot.
boroughs. It's massive. It's
Yeah,
what Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens.
I've not been to Queens or Staten Island. Those are mythical to me still.
Uh,
But yeah.
Staten Island, you're not missing much. The ferry goes there,
Mm.
and it's more residential. Queens is quite fascinating, actually, if you get a chance. I've been all over the place. I've been all over the world. Um, as far as New Zealand,
Oh
which is
wow.
interesting. That's 26 hours flying with stops, of course. Travel around the world, you discover that I think it's one of the greatest benefits for an individual because you may say, "Oh, I live here and it's the most wonderful thing in the world," but you really don't know much about the world. You only know your little bubble. And then you look around, and if you get a bunch of bubbles, it's interesting how they all kind of, you take a couple bubbles, they come into a big bubble. You just keep increasing the size of your bubble. And you start looking at the world in a very different way. And I think it's a very important thing. I think one of the greatest educations one could give themselves is to travel, is to see different parts of the world. Because we have
Yeah.
such a tendency to sit there and stand on our little rock and say, this is great. And that's just part of life. Part of it, we don't get the opportunity to see how. What do you think life is? How do you think good is? What do you think bad is? What do you think intelligence is? You talk to all different people from all different parts of the world, and you get a totally different view, a different understanding of just every aspect of life.
Hmm.
It's really kind of incredible as far as I'm concerned. Uh, I think it's the greatest gift one could give themselves.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's totally like a high horse thing to say, but I remember like a year or so ago I was like I had thought it that it was a duty to travel. I felt it to myself that it was a sort of responsibility to get around, to just move those bones and to drive out and like
Sure.
see places. Um,
Yeah, of
yeah.
course, the most important thing. Do you know something that's really fascinating? How
What?
many people in the United States don't have a passport?
Oh wow.
It's incredible. The number, I would say somewhere around 50% of the country does not have a passport. And
15 or
I
50?
might be being 50, 50.
Oh wow. Jeez.
And I might
Yeah.
be being a little conservative here, actually, in that estimation. It's at one time it was like 60%. I think it's gone down a little bit. I think it's maybe around 50 now. But it's still a frightening number. It's half the country hasn't seen anything besides their country.
Now I'm gonna take to Google with that, but that that's so
Yeah, look
weird
it
to
up.
me on a practical level, though, because that doesn't even make sense to me on a pragmatic level. Because a passport is also a form of identification that you can use for
Yeah.
doing like
Hmm.
taxes and for applying to like a
Sure.
job and for like I remember my most recent job I worked at one of the there was a thing where it was like in terms of register because when I first got hired they were like, okay, we just need your driver's license and your passport, and I was like, great. It was from like a list of like A, B, C column, and it was different
Hmm.
identifications. But if you just had your
Sure.
passport and your driver's license, then you were golden. And so I was like, okay,
Hmm.
well I have those. Uh, it's so weird. Like, what? How can you not have your passport? That's so weird to me. Yeah, yeah,
Look that up. You'll be
yeah, yeah.
amazed.
Let's see.
You will
How
be
many people
amazed.
don't have a passport in America? Um, holy shit. 60% of the population do not have passports as of 2017.
Yeah, thank
Oh
you very
my
much.
god.
That's what I was saying a couple of years ago. I think it's gone down a little bit. I'm giving it, as I said, somewhat conservatively, saying 50%, but it could still be
Yeah.
very close to 60. Isn't that amazing?
That's
That's something absolutely frightening.
I completely agree. And like I just said, I don't think it's just an issue of not getting to romantically see sides of like Japan or Germany or Canada, but also just in terms of having a pragmatic identifier for yourself. Like that's really
Yeah,
stupid that
yeah.
people don't have
Uh-huh.
passports.
Yeah. Well, it's
Wow.
something that I've always found fascinating is the fact that that massive discrepancy. It's it's an interesting thing when we look at, as I said, all the way back when we started talking, that the human animal, we haven't changed. We haven't changed much over time. Our toys change, but we act very much the same. And if you think about going back in time, going back in history, think of the people that were.
Now, as we have arrived at the end here, is there anything you would like to plug regarding yourself? Does Jack Stanley have want to plug his? Does he have a Facebook or a website or
Well, I
anything?
would say basically in YouTube, Jack Stanley, and I'm also on Facebook, Jack Stanley once again. And I like to talk and I like to share. And in many respects, what I try to do and what I have tried to do since like 2008, just basically as a fun thing. I'm not trying to get tons of listeners and stuff like that or make money. It's just for fun. And I've tried to be like an old uncle sitting around by the fire and telling you stories and talking about things
Hmm.
and sharing my past with today's future and basically giving what I have learned to new ears so they can learn and then share the story, the whole story of mankind, which has always been the word of mouth. We have learned from each other and we share the stories with each other. And that's what I try to do.
Well, obviously I think that's a noble goal, and obviously what I'm trying to do here is to have a range of perspectives. I'm trying to, I guess, with the podcast, and I
Mm-hmm.
imagine many other people with their podcasts are trying to do the same, is to have a wide range. Like,
Sure.
obviously, I love having like you on here, but I definitely at some point bit grandiose, but I'd like to have maybe like local politicians come on or people around my age who I actually have been trying to plan to get a friend of mine on here who is very into spirituality and
Mm-hmm.
astrology and religion. have that, so to have a range
That would
of
be
perspectives.
fascinating. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
The old saying is the world's your oyster. You
no,
sit there.
yeah, yeah.
There's no reason you can't do anything you want to do. That is the greatest lesson that I have learned from people in my conversations, that people that were presidents and people that were leaders and inventors. And if you really want to do something, you can do it, and I'm sure you will. It just is a matter of making your mind uh, work in that direction. It's very important to look at it that way. You can't be your own enemy. You can't be a Tesla in the sense of destroying what you're trying to create. You have to just look at it, let it go, have some fun, and always be willing to laugh at yourself.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yes,
That's
yes.
important.
I
So,
try to laugh at myself every day. My mom says,
oh, good.
Ryan, you're scaring me. But
Well, basically, I look at what I do half the time, and I have to sit down and laugh because the older you get, the more difficult things get, and you discover you have a twin that you don't see very well who puts things in places that you can't remember where they are, and it gets more fascinating, and you have to laugh, otherwise you go crazy.
right, well, heck yeah, that's what we're all about here at the Too Many
Yeah.
Casts
So this
podcast.
this has been fun. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah,
Glad we could sit down and chat.
heck yeah. Thank you for coming on, and you have a
Sure.
good night, Mr. Stanley.
Okay. And you too. You take care.
All
Bye
right,
bye.
thank you. Bye bye.